Don't hang up that phone. We've found what you're looking for. Welcome to the Let's Talk Cabling Podcast with Chuck Bowser, RCDD. Well, seeing how we're pulling Category 6A, the most powerful twisted pair in the world, you got to ask yourself this one question. Did I pull 295 or 300 feet? Well, do you feel lucky? Do you, punk? What exactly does RCDD stand for? Registered Communications Distribution Designer. Just the expert you need to ensure your cable plant performs exactly as designed. The elite professional, knowledgeable, and experienced in leading-edge ICT design principles. Now, send the new guy to the truck for a bucket of dial tone and the cable stretchers, while you listen to an informative program on telecommunications.
Welcome back, everybody, to the first After Hours Live with Chuck Bowser RCD of 2022. Yes, this is a historic, there it goes. This is a historic event because it's live on Facebook. It's live on LinkedIn. It's live on YouTube. It's also live on TikTok. Yes, hello TikTok people. Yes. And also, hey, I like the new sign over there. Isn't that pretty cool? I think I got just a tad bit too bright. There we go. How's everybody doing tonight? All right. So I had a great vacation. I was off for about 2.5 weeks or so. I hope everybody had a great weekend, or not weekend, but holiday season. And I'm really looking forward to 2022, and I hope you are too. And I got a bunch of questions that were submitted over this 2-week break. And I hope that that you submit questions as well. I also apologize for the mix-up for the for this broadcast because I originally set it up for 6 a.m. in the morning. Yeah, well, it meant 6 p.m. So for those of you who are regular audience members, you know this is always done at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And during the show, I'm not doing this because the TikTok audience may not be experienced enough to really know what's going on with the after hours. It's 30 minutes of get to ask your favorite RCDD any questions about installation, certification, design, project management, career path skills, right? So we actually open that up to everybody. And if you've been a member of this audience for long enough, you always know that we always do an acronym challenge. So today's acronym is ONT. ONT. What does the acronym ONT stand for? Does anybody know? Put it in the chat box if you think you know what that means. And of course, I've got to do my typical acronym saying. Spay or neuter your acronym. We've got enough of them in this industry. We don't need any more. So help eliminate the population some. So ONT, what is it? Anybody know? It stands for Optical Network Terminal. Optical Network Terminal. 10,000 points to George Humphrey for getting that question correctly. And Brad, welcome, buddy. And 10,000 points to you too, because I'm in a good mood because this is the first one of the year. So I've got to kind of celebrate that a little bit. And I'm still trying to get back into my groove here. So turn off that chat. So Brad also got it as well. ONT. Hey, is anybody going to Bixie in February? Let me know if you're going to Bixie or not. I'm just kind of curious if you are. And let's see, what's the other thing that I always do on the After Hours show? What is the other thing I always do? Oh, yeah. What are you drinking? What are you drinking? So I am drinking a mixture of water and Cola Zevia because, again, no sugar, no caffeine. put in the chat box, excuse me, put in the chat box, what are you drinking tonight? And this after hours, so it can be an adult beverage. Absolutely can be an adult beverage. Now let's go ahead and, I guess, let's just jump right straight into the question. So if you have a question, type it in the chat box in whichever platform you're using. Same with you on TikTok. If you have a question for the RCDD, put it in the chat box. So the first question, hold on, let me put on my safety glasses so the words don't jump off the page and injure my eyes, right? So the first question actually came from TikTok. And this came from user NPR2550. He posted it a couple of days back. Hello, Slow Online 86. This question came from NPR2550. And his question was, can you use tie wraps, can you use cable ties for data wire, or do you have to use Velcro? Now, before I answer this question, what do you use for your data cabling? Put it in the chat box. Do you use Velcro or do you use tie wraps? What say you? Now, let me talk about, it kind of really depends. If you're trying to get a warranty from a cable manufacturer, some of the manufacturers are going to require you use Velcro on the higher performing data cables like Cat 6A. But if you're not trying to get a warranty, then it's realistic. You can use tie wraps or Velcro. You can use either or. If you use tie wraps for your data cable, right? If you use tie wraps for your data cable, do not overcinch them. They should be snug, but just snug enough where you can still kind of spin it on the bundle and not deform any of the cable jackets. Because when you deform that cable jacket, you're crushing the jacket, and it's bringing those pairs together, closer together inside that cable, and then that, hello, Carlo, and that will cause crosstalk problems, right? Crosstalk is EMI when two pairs get close to each other, and they start causing problems. So don't overcinch it. And then also with tie wraps, really what you want to make sure is you want to watch out for. I don't like tie wraps for data cabling and or voice cabling. They're not re-enterable. If the customer adds more drops later on, you got to cut off all them tie wraps and put your cable in and put in new tie wraps. That's a lot of jobs to waste. So I'm not a real super big fan on tie wraps for data cabling, but you can use them for data cabling. Just exercise caution to not crush those jackets on those cables. My preference is always going to be Velcro. Okay, Velcro is re-enterable. Then when you do them straps, you do them a little bit bigger than they need to be, and then that way, when you add drops at a later date in that telecom room, it's just a matter of opening up the tie wraps, putting them in, and then putting the tie wraps back down again. Okay. Another question coming in. This one's coming in from TikTok, and it says, Chuck, and this is from Colton 803, looks like. Kind of hard to read, a real small little print. He asked, what is your passion? What is my passion? I got lots of passion. That's my problem. Too many passions, not enough time. But I would have to say that I really, really love mentoring people. Hence the reason for the podcast and for the YouTube channel and everything else. I love mentoring people. I love mentoring people. So let me see. What was the next question? Oh, so Velcro, you can, another benefit of Velcro. You can't over tighten most of the time, right? Now, there are some Velcro straps that got that plastic loop on it that you can feed the Velcro through, and you can kind of pull back on it, and that one you can over tighten it, but most of the time with Velcro, you're not going to over tighten. You're not going to have crosstalk issues. So that's why I really like that. Okay, so the next question number 2, comes from Brian. He submitted this via LinkedIn, and he says, Chuck, if I'm estimating a project where the customer documentation, the RFQ, request for quote, the RFQ is missing some items, should I price it exactly as it's in the RFQ and then hit him with change orders later, or should I price the job with the missing items? What do you say? And let me know in the chat box, what's your opinion there? I was an estimator for 10 years, and I learned this lesson the hard way. Estimate what the customer put on paper. Estimate what the customer put on paper, okay? Even if you know the design is not complete, even if you know there's something missing from the design, estimate what's put on paper, okay? Now, if you're in a competitive bid scenario where you're bidding against other contractors, then my suggestion is, again, still bid exactly what's on the paper, but then say, in our evaluation of your documentation, we realize that you are missing some things, and here's the cost to add those things. So that way they have the base cost that gives them the number exactly as they put that document out there. And if they realize that they did miss things in their design, they can go through and add up the other things that you've added. So that way, when they go to compare those two bids, they got two numbers that are direct comparison to each other, right? That's why you want to do it that way. Let me tell you a little story. I did an estimate one time, and it was a competitive bid estimate. And I was estimating against competitors in our areas. And the customer put out an RFQ, and we had to bid the materials that they had on their bill of materials. Well, they left out the cable. There was no cable in the project. So I put the cable in the project for as far as pricing. And then when they awarded the project, I found out that I did not win the project because I was too high. But I happen to know people in the company really well. It was one of our better customers. And they said, well, Chuck, you lost it because you put cable in the project. And we specifically said only bid the stuff in the bill of material. And the reason it was missing cable, they had cable left over from a previous project that they were going to use, right? It was still on the spool, still brand new cable. That's why they didn't have that on the bill of materials. And that's why I say bid exactly like that document says, right? And then say, well, we know some things missing. Here's the price for the additional line items to put those things to make a complete design that will guarantee that performance that you're seeking. Does that make sense? Okay. Remember, bidding scenario for low voltage cabling can be, you can lose literally a matter of $50. It can be literally that close, and you can lose. That's why you really want to make sure that you bid it that way. Right? So the next question number 3, and this is actually a multi-part question. This is from Mohammed. Mohammed, let me know in the chat box if you are here, because I told you I was going to answer your questions tonight. He sent these questions before I went on vacation, but I was also very busy with the end of the year trying to get training done and stuff like that. So he had a multi-part question, so I'm going to answer each one of those individually, right? So the first question is there any rack layout recommendations by Bixby when organizing copper patch panels versus active switches, considering the ease of patching, the optimization, and the air circulation for active components? Muhammad is in the room. Yes. Okay. I'll say this right now. I can't tell you what Bixby recommends unless it's printed in their TDM. I don't work for Bixby. I'm not a representative of Bixby. I can only tell you what's in the TDM or what's in the standards. So I just want to make sure that's abundantly clear. This is basically my opinion, what I've read in those documents. I do not represent Bixby. Okay. Now, with that being said, you look at the TDM on the 14th edition, page 3-3, gives you all the clearances for putting in racks, wall-mounted racks and floor-mounted racks. One of the big ones is 3 feet of clearance. You have to have 3 feet of clearance. They say the TDM all the way around. The NEC is going to give you clearances only for in front of or behind the active equipment. They don't necessarily care about side clearances, right? I'm going to tell you, it's also going to tell you on the TDM that if you're putting that rack, that wall-mounted rack near a corner, it's got to be at least 6 inches out from that corner. So the real limiting factor here, Mohammed, is what does the active equipment recommend? And that's going to be important because there's this rule called the half-life rule when it comes to electronic equipment. The half-life rule tells us that for every 10 degrees above ambient temperature that a piece of equipment is getting exposed to, it's going to reduce the life expectancy of that equipment by half. By half. technology equipment already has a lifespan of about 3 to 5 years, not because it's going to go bad, but because there's always something newer and faster coming out, right? So if you have a piece of equipment that's getting exposed to extra 10 degrees above ambient temperature, it's going to lose its life expectancy by half of what it's normally expected to go. So follow the active equipment manufacturer. That's going to be the best advice for you. Now, a good practice for me that I've always followed for your smaller project, I'm going to break it down to two different answers: small projects and large projects. Right? Small projects and large projects. So, a small project, a good practice is going to be to take the copper patch panels, right, and then put a copper patch panel, then a data switch, and then a copper patch panel, then a data switch, and just kind of work your way down. That's going to give you room for airflow. That's going to give you room to also reach in between those active pieces of equipment to do any moves, adds, or changes. Because trust me, things are going to go bad. They're going to need to be repaired. You're going to be running new cables, and you got to get in between those two switches to punch cables on those patch panels. So you want to leave space there. You got to leave enough space. So that's why I said, I would actually recommend a 24-port patch panel, a horizontal wire manager, and then that switch. That way you can do your crisscrossing in the horizontal wire manager. There's a general thought out there by a lot of younger technicians, and it's not right or wrong or indifferent, but you see a lot of it where they'll literally take a 24-port panel, put a switch right underneath of it, and they'll get these little 3-inch patch cords, and they'll just activate every port on that system. Okay, if it's a small, veterinary office or small home office, something like that, where there's only one patch panel and one switch, okay. But your bigger jobs, you really got to be thinking about growth. You really do. So as long as you do that separation for that small thing like that, you'll be okay as far as air circulation. Right. Now let's talk about the larger projects. Larger projects, you're talking about where you have an entire rack filled with, or maybe multiple racks filled with copper patch panels and switches. It's always a best idea to put the switch at the bottom of the rack because switches are heavy. That way, all that weight's below your center of gravity, and not all the. If you put the heavy stuff at the top, there's a chance that rack could topple if it's not installed correctly. So you can put your copper patch panels at the top, your horizontal wire managers, your vertical managers, and then your switch, like a big, Cisco switch or even a series of smaller switches at the bottom. Okay, so that's a good idea for the larger jobs. Again, make sure you check with the equipment manufacturer, Cisco or whoever it might be, and find out what do they recommend for as far as clearances for their equipment. Because every piece of equipment, when you look at the manufacturer specifications, have different requirements for as far as amount of space. And if you want to have the warranty for that piece of equipment, then you're going to want to make sure that you install it the way that they want it installed. Okay? That's the first question that Mohammed asked. That was a great question too, Mohammed. I appreciate that question. So the second question he asked, is there a standard for maximum number of cables for 42 rack unit rack? So Mohammed, where are you? If I remember, I think you were I want to say you were in Saudi Arabia, if I remember right. When I looked at your LinkedIn profile, I think you're in Saudi Arabia. So for those who may not know what a rack unit is, a rack unit is just a amount of space that a patch panel or a horizontal wire manager or a switch occupies. It's a 1 rack unit patch panel, a 2 rack unit patch panel, 3 rack unit patch panel. There's even 4 rack unit devices out there as well. 1 rack unit is 1.75 inches or 45 millimeters, I think, 45 millimeters. I'm not really good with my metric inches conversions. So what does that really mean? So 42 rack units. So let's talk about patch panels. So patch panels are often sold in 12, 24, or 48 port configurations. You can buy them in 1 rack unit, 2 rack unit, and 3 rack units. There's actually even some 16 and 32 port patch panels out there that you can buy, right? But they're not as common. You don't see them very often. So when you look at patch panels and patch switching, it's really divided by. I'm getting there, buddy. Patch panels are divided into different types of densities. You have low density, medium density, and high density. Okay, I'm getting to the number cable. I'm just kind of going a long way around to get to it. So for low density, that means one rack unit can handle between 12 and 16 cables. For the low density 2 rack unit, you can have between 24 and 32 cables, and for the 3 rack unit, you can have up to 48 cables. Okay. If you're doing medium density, 1 rack unit would be 24 cables, and a 2 rack unit would be 48 cables. If you're doing high density patching, then you're going to have up to 48 cables for each rack unit. Now, assuming that there's not going to be any active equipment inside this 42 unit rack unit equipment rack. That means on the low end, using the low density 12 to 16 cables per rack unit, that's 588 cables. 588 cables. That's a lot of cables. On the high end, with the high density, the 48 cables per rack unit, that is 2,016 cables for that one rack. 2,016 cables. So you're going to find though, but you're really going to be limited by the pathway getting to that rack. The cable trays, the ladder rack assemblies getting to that tray. Because if you've got, let's go with the small one, 588 cables. Most companies, most manufacturers, most technicians generally will like to organize the bundles going to the racks in the same size as the patch panels. That way it lays in nice and neat, right? So if they've got a 24 port 1 rack unit panel, right? They'll take that and divide that up and just have all those 24 go to that one, or they'll do 2 sets of 12. You got to manage that. You've got to manage that. So the range is between 588 and 2016. From that, you just got to subtract whatever rack units you're going to be using for active equipment, right? So subtract that out and then use those numbers that I just used. Another issue you're going to run into, especially when you get on the high density side, the 2,000 cable side, you're going to run into a huge problem with maintaining bend radiuses, right? Especially if it's category 6A cable. Now, the manufacturer's getting really good about this because Cat 6A cable, the standard, if I remember right, allows for that outside dimension to be up to 0.357 of an inch. There are some category 6A cables right now that are small as 0.23. Just to kind of give you a comparison, Cat 5e is 0.187. So that's almost the size of a category 5e cable. Definitely the size of a Cat 6 cable. So that allows you to put more cables in the cable tray stuff, but it's also going to allow you to have a smaller bend radius. So if you're going to be doing a lot of cables like that 2016, use one of those reduced outside diameter category 6A cables so you can have those smaller outside diameters and not exceed bend radiuses, because that will affect problems. That will affect your testing when you go to do testing for that cable plan. Okay. Does that answer that question for you, Mohammed? And then his next question is there any specific standard for copper cable bundling, i.e. maximum number for cabling for power over Ethernet? Power over Ethernet. This is always a great conversation. Always a great conversation. So there are standards out there that do actually address this. It's discussed in the NFPA 70, the National Fire Protection Association National Electrical Code Book, used predominantly in the United States, but you are not in the U.S., Mom. You were in the Middle East, if I remember correctly. So you're not going to really care too much what the NEC says. There is some documentation in the TIA 569.D-2, SENLEC TR 50174-99-1, and also the ISO IEC TS 29125 and TIA Technical Service Bulletin 184-A. So you will find sizes in those standards. Or not necessarily size, but they're kind of very generic. There's a lot of factors that go into determining what bundle size you need for power over Ethernet, where cables are going to have power over Ethernet. Now, the reason the bundle size are a real problem with power over Ethernet is because when you start putting current down that cable. We're already putting current down the cable. We're putting the voltage down for the data signal, but we're now also putting DC current, 15 watts, 30 watts, 60 watts, 90 watts, 100 watts down that cable as well. When you put current down a cable, the cable will heat up. You put a bunch of the cables together in one bundle, the temperature will rise in the bundle, and that's going to cause you insertion loss problems. That's going to cause you performance problems. And if you get it to what's called the my fire department days, the term just went on my head. If you raise the temperature of the components of the cable to its flash point, it could catch on fire. That's why they don't want it up that high. So like Lisa said in the house, she put in here, DC resistance balance testing and PoE lifts are critical once the cables are deployed as well. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. His question was, I don't know if you just got in and saw the question, Lisa. He was asking about sizing bundles for power over Ethernet. So let's talk about PoE and the four types first, right? So PoE 1 is 15.4 watts. PoE type 2. Hello, Mark is in the house. PoE type 2 is 30 watts. PoE type 3 power over Ethernet 60 watts. Type 4 is 90 watts, and power over HD base T is up to 100 watts. So the type 1 and the type 2 run off of 2-pair cabling. Types 3, 4, and the HD base T run off of 4-pair cabling. So in order to really understand what size bundle that you really need to be, you really got to look at the rating of the cable and the amps that you're going to be putting down that cable. And you got to do a calculation. So most cables are generally rated 60 degrees Celsius. And you can actually do calculations based on the amps and also can come up with that temperature to make sure they don't exceed 60 degrees Celsius. Some of the bundle sizes, you'll also notice when you look at the charts, the lower the wattage, the bigger the bundles you're allowed to have. I was actually looking at a couple of them today on my lunch break in preparation for this question. And I was on one of the manufacturer sites, and they were saying for type 1, they were saying, I think it was 380 cables, maximum size for type 1 power over Ethernet. Another manufacturer, one that I'm very familiar with, I won't say who it is, they actually have a new cable they just came out with, a reduced outside diameter category 6A cable that they say can handle up to a bundle size of 720 cables for all 4 types of PoE. Okay. Now, again, this kind of falls back to the same conversation, same question that you had about the sizing of the for the patch panels, right? Do you really want a 388 bundle cables coming down the cable tray and then have to try to break that out and feed it to the patch panels? That's not really a good thing. Most manufacturers are going to tell you 24 is the magic number. Matter of fact, that's kind of what they were going to tell you stick to 24. That way you're well within all those considerations, so that way you're not heating up those bundles. It's also a good idea when you're doing those power over Ethernet bundles to keep them at least a minimum of was it 6 inches or 3 inches? I'll have to go back and double check that. It's either 3 inches or 6 inches from the edge of the cable tray, and a certain amount of distance between the bundles. I want to say that's 3 inches and 6 inches from the edge. That's to make sure that nobody accidentally hits a bundle that's got a bunch of 4-pair cabling with power Ethernet. Now you got a bunch of stuff shorting out, right? So again, 24 bundles is probably going to be the same best there. It's going to give you better aesthetics, easier addressing to get up to the cable, and also, my watch is telling me it's 6:30. And also it's going to make it look a lot better aesthetically. Most customers equate installation times with what looks good. Right? And as Mark said, also heating concerns. Absolutely. I think it's flash point. I think with the term I was looking for earlier. If you get to its flash point, it will spontaneously catch on fire. Every material has a flash point. Paper has a flash point. I want to say it's 240 degrees, 280 degrees. If I put this room heat up to 200 degrees, it will spontaneously catch on fire without an ignition source. Same thing with cable. That dielectric will catch on fire, and it'll burn about 3 feet a minute as it goes down the cable tray. So that's why you want to avoid that kind of stuff. So those were all the questions I had. We're at 3-minute auto ignition. Thank you, George. Auto ignition point. Anybody else have any other questions before we log out on this first session of 2022 that's being broadcast on TikTok and LinkedIn and Facebook and YouTube. So let me see what Mark has. Something put in here. The concerns were directed at plenum airspace, decreasing the cooling effectiveness. Yep. And and this is going to sound counterintuitive, but shielded cabling helps your heat dissipation because it acts like a heat sink and it pulls that heat away and helps it to dissipate the heat off. So you like the new sign? I do too. I just fished the wall literally at 4:30 today to get it up and running for the thing. So, alrighty. So thanks everybody for showing up on the first one. I apologize for the mix-up. It wasn't 6 a.m. It was 6 p.m. Oops. I'm trying to get back in my groove after being off for over 2 weeks. And so we'll see everybody next Thursday. And make sure that you submit questions ahead of time. Till next time, everybody, remember, knowledge is power. Take care.